So one thing we do need to talk about is how do we practice? A lot of times there's this misconception of if you're not practicing 4 hours a day, 6 hours a day, 8 hours a day, you're not doing it right. And that is not true at all. Quality of practice is what counts, not quantity of practice. So one thing I have found throughout my years of playing is it's much better to have 10 really good minutes of practice as opposed to 2 hours of just bad, unfocused practice. So one thing you can do is say maybe you get home from school, work, wherever it is you've been all day. You only have 5-10 minutes. Well, that's not a big deal. Just pick up your guitar, maybe strum 2 or 3 chords, and just work on that for 10 minutes. 10 minutes is up. After you've done your couple of chords, just get up and walk away from it. Maybe later in the day you can come back and play a little bit more. So you don't have to worry about sitting down and saying, oh, I need to get a half hour right now. That really doesn't have to be done. You can spread it throughout the day. Another thing that really helps too is to kind of have a game plan when you're going into your practice session. So for example, you might want to work on the G, the C, and the D chord and switching between them for the day. So you'd write down earlier in the day or even just mentally make a list. Say, today when I go into practice, I want to work on these 3 chords, and that's what I'm going to spend my focus on. And then you go ahead and do that in your practice session. I've often found that helps me stay focused, and I will have a much more fruitful practice if I go in with a plan as opposed to just going in and being like, well, I need to do this and this and this and this and this. And then you just end up wasting time by just sitting there thinking about what you should be doing. But if you have some goals in mind and a plan of attack, it's generally easier. One, it's easier to get started practicing because you know what you want to do. And it's easier to stay on track. So your practice will be much more effective. You'll have probably a much better time practicing too. Another thing to think about when it comes to practice is that it's not all about being at your guitar and working the fingers and working the strumming and getting the chord patterns and chord progressions down. Just as much of it is mental, is in your head. So you could be at work or school again, and say you have a little bit of time, assuming you got all your work done and or schoolwork done, and just sit down and say, okay, well, I'm going to visualize maybe what does my hand look like when I'm making a G chord, or what does my hand look like when I'm making a C chord? Where are my fingers on the fretboard when I'm doing that? Or maybe you can draw up a little grid and write down your chord diagrams. Doing that, like for me personally, I mean, it works a little bit different for everybody. Some learn by doing, some learn by listening, some learn by writing things down. I find if I sit down and write out a chord diagram, it sticks in my brain for some reason. And that might be helpful to some people out there where if you just sit down and write out chord diagrams, you'll come back to your practice session and find out, hey, that chord I was struggling with before because I couldn't remember it, all of a sudden it's coming a lot easier now because I've been just writing it down and almost putting it into your subconscious to dig up later when you get back to your guitar. Another part of it too is just listening. Listen to music. Listen to the kind of music you want to play. I have found that the more I listen to a certain style of guitar, the easier it is to play that style of guitar. I have done work with bands where they want to play a lot of country, and I don't really listen to a lot of country, so I'd be like, oh, well, I don't know if I can play a lot of country. But I found that after sitting down and listening to some more country music, it was easier for me to learn how to play country songs because I had a good idea of how it should sound. Not only is listening a great practice tool, but it's also a great break from practice too. You can just get away from the guitar and listen to music, but still feel like you're accomplishing something on the guitar because you are mentally. So it doesn't all have to be physical. And finally, I would say Another really nice thing to do that really helps keep people focused, helps me focus. For personally, I focus a lot better when I write notes about my practice session when I get done. I like to talk a little bit about what I did that day, what I liked, what I didn't like, what gave me trouble, and what was getting better. The nice thing about this is, one, as I said, it keeps you focused, but two, then you can go back and see where your progress is being made. And it's so much easier to continue on with something when you can actually see the progress that's being made. And finally, I guess the best bit of advice about practicing would be to just have fun. Don't stress yourself out. Don't worry if you have to practice slower. Nobody's going to come and peek in your window and say, hey, look at that person. They're only practicing 3 beats per measure. I can't believe it. Why are they going so slow? That's not going to happen unless you live in a really bad neighborhood. You don't really have to worry about that. Practice at your pace. Take your time. If you get really frustrated with something, just put your guitar down, get up and walk away for a little bit. Get a glass of water, or just walk around the house. Just kind of distance yourself for a minute and come back in a little bit you'll have a clear head and a fresh outlook on it instead of just getting mad. And you'll find that if you get frustrated and you continue to push yourself and push yourself and push yourself while you're that frustrated, you're probably going to have a less productive practice session. So overall, just take your time and have fun.